All right, welcome back to the Jewelry Sales Academy. This is Across the Case, and this is going to be our second segment with none other than Joel Weiland of J. David Jewelry in Oklahoma. As of right now, Joel has 3 different locations in Oklahoma. He's here visiting us in Little Rock, Arkansas today. We've been going through a tour. He's extremely interesting and has a great story, not just in his own person, but how he's built his business and bringing his team down here. And so let's just go ahead and start it off. And Joel, give us a little bit of backstory about how you got into jewelry.
Oh, yeah, you bet, William. First of all, thank you for having me. This is super exciting for us to be here. And when my older sister worked at an independent jeweler, I was 15 years old. I asked him if I could have a job, and he let me scrub his toilets. So I literally started in the jewelry business, I like to say from the bottom up. So in scrubbing his toilets, I made sure he had the cleanest restrooms in town. And shortly after that, he started teaching me how to polish jewelry. So after polishing jewelry for almost 2 years, got super busy at Christmas time. And he said, hey, can you clean up and go out and help some people out front? So I went out, helped some people out front. Christmas was over, and I'm like, I love working with people. I want to work on the floor. And he goes, I need you to polish jewelry again. I'm like, no, I want to work on the floor. And he goes, it's not an option. So I went to the largest jewelry store in town at that time and applied for a job as a salesperson. I was 17. They laughed, said, we don't hire anybody under 21. So I said I was a bench jeweler too, which at that point I'd never sat down at a bench. I just polished bench work, but I had seen it done for 2 years, and I'm a visual learner. So they said, well, our jeweler's been here for 27 years. If you can come in for an 8-hour day, he'll test you and see if you have skills we can use. So at the end of that 8-hour day, they asked, how long have you been sitting at a bench? And I'm like, 8 hours. And they said, you have incredible skills. We'd love to make you an offer. I was making $3.25 at the time, $3.25 an hour to be exact. And they offered me $5.50 an hour. And I'm inside jumping up and down thinking, I just made $1 million. I was a long ways away from that, and I worked for them for almost 6 years. And during that time, got married, bought a house, had a kid, and my wife stayed at home at that point with our 1-year-old son. And we were maintaining that with me, working for $9 an hour as a bench jeweler. And every time I'd go in and ask for a raise, he would say, work more hours. So I was up to about 80 hours a week and never saw my wife and son. And my wife's like, I'd really like to see you more. So I went in and asked for a raise. He said, you've been with us almost 6 years, we'll give you $1 an hour. And I was mowing lawns and waiting tables on the side to continue to maintain my wife staying at home. With that $1 an hour, I said, I need 15 to stay. And he said, it's not in the budget. So I said, well, I guess I need to turn in my notice. So at the ripe age of 21, I go home and I tell my wife. She asked how the raise went, and I said, not as planned, I quit. And she goes, you're joking, because I do that a lot. And with that, she said, what are we going to do? And I said, I'd like to try it myself. So we started with 3 rings and $500 out of our house. We transitioned that a year later into a tanning salon. We put a case in a tanning salon, and I started selling jewelry out of a tanning salon. 2 years later, we opened our first jewelry store with 4 cases in it, and I think we had 45 pieces of jewelry at that point. And I felt like I had a real jewelry store, and it was still just my wife and I. That year, we did $48,000 in gross sales. As we grew that company, it was the year 2000, I joined a buying group and started learning how to implement systems and processes to make it scalable so that I could grow. So we opened our we moved from a 600 square foot store to a 4,000 square foot freestanding building and opened the same week of September 11th of 2001.
Oh, man.
Which was not a good time to open a new store and quadruple your overhead. And I thought, build it and they will come. They didn't, but it taught us survival skills we could not have learned any other way. And transitioning from our bench jeweler to our salesperson to doing both of them, knowing that there's only 168 hours in a week and you can only work so many of them, I knew I could produce more on the floor than I could on the bench. So that was the first place I replaced myself. And when I saw that replacing myself overnight grew my business, I could now sell more. And I'm like, well, if I can replace myself in sales, I can grow more. So as I started identifying areas that if I can replace myself in my company in this area, it enables me to grow. So at that point, my focus was identify what my job is and replace myself in it. And as we've been able to do that in every aspect, that's what's enabled us to actually grow to the point of my store didn't need me anymore, which was a great feeling. But I got really bored because now I didn't have anything to do. So then that's how the second store came about, not because I always wanted a second store, but I was really bored. And my wife said, you need another hobby. So why not open another store? So I'm grateful to have a wife that has always supported me in everything that I've done. And to that, we opened that second store with our first store at that point running seamlessly with systems and processes in place. Logic told me number two is just as easy. We broke every system and process that we had.
That's how it goes.
Yep.
Yeah.
And we realized that our systems and processes only worked for one store, not two. So we had to relearn everything that we had been doing for almost 20 years at that point.
Now, was it just you doing all the systems operations, or did you have somebody at that point yet?
At that point, I had a manager, yes.
For one store?
Yes.
And so you were opening the second store?
Yes.
I just want to tell you, I met you and your wife at JCK, and I can tell you two things that I learned from you. Number one, your wife really loves you.
Yes, she does.
And then number two, that I forgot what you said, but Zach and I were listening, and you were talking to inventory, and I was like, man, this guy has really delegated out a lot of things, because that's the thing that holds so many people in jewelry back. And even my dad has almost the exact same story as you. I mean, I think
Wow.
he started working, he says $3 an hour, so y'all might have to hash that out
Okay,
together about
yeah.
who was the cheapest labor. But no, same thing about most people, even myself growing up, it's that delegation and that ego to hold those things.
Yeah.
And I mean, that was one of the first things that I picked up from you, was with Nate and some of your team, that you had really removed yourself back from it. But you went from 600 square feet to 4,000 square feet. How did that's a big jump to just go over it there.
It's something I wouldn't, if I was trying to give someone advice today, I would say don't do that.
Why is that? What were the...
It was, today I like to say that we take measurable steps as we grow.
Yeah.
That was not a step, that was a leap. Mm-hmm. When they say jump off a cliff, survival rate is not great.
Yeah.
So, but when you jump across a small ravine, you're not risking death. Mm-hmm. So again, I think it was so big from what we knew. We didn't have the systems and processes in place yet to grow at that rate.
Right.
So our growing pains were much more painful back then.
When you were talking about like growing pains and that, and you're going from a 600 square foot, 4Ks to 4,000 square foot, what were the biggest pains? Was it supply? Was it the inventory that you were getting? Was it the staff? Was it the sales? Was it the market? What was the biggest obstacle you had to overcome?
Wow, that's a great question. I mean, it's definitely all of those combined, which creates a mountain.
Yeah.
But I really think probably where I feel like we failed the greatest in that first initial rapid growth. For 5 years straight, we grew at over 100% annually.
Right.
And when you're growing at that rate of speed, how do you keep up
Yeah.
with your systems and processes, which we were not doing? So at that point, we were growing at 100% annually, but we were buying at 200 or 300% annually.
Yeah.
Well, that's not, cash flow doesn't work like that. So I hadn't learned cash flow yet. That was a painful lesson. So again, in learning everything from, that was my important lesson on inventory management. So then at that point, we learned survival skills of, okay, now we have more jewelry, that means we have to sell more.
Yeah.
So it now became, and you even said, which I love this, sometimes the fear of poverty is your motivator.
Mm-hmm.
That was my motivator at that time, was the only way I can pay these bills is if I sell more.
Right. My dad says he bought us into this revenue. He would overbuy, and then we'd have to sell it all, and then he'd overbuy.
He's a wise man.
Well, I don't know. I think it just sounds like you guys are related or something like that. But I mean, that was, how did you, I mean, we're still, even at today, still trying to figure out, because, you know, you talk to people who consult, who do inventory analytics, and they make it seem like it's so easy to figure out what your budget should be and what you can grow at this year and do. I mean, what are some of the things that you figured out on that?
Well, I haven't found that crystal ball yet. I don't know if you have.
No, no, not at all.
But one thing that I love is when you have the longevity behind you and you can take past history, and it's so much easier to forecast at that point. And before, when we were growing at, you know, I love to say it's a whole lot easier to increase $1 than it is to increase $10.
Right.
So back when we were growing at over 100% a year, well, it's because we weren't big. So even though now our growth is percentage-wise far less than what it was back then, the numbers are actually bigger. So to that, it's much more manageable. But what I learned, and I think the best part is going back to even you saying the delegating, is that feeling of nobody can do it better than me. I'm the first one that did this. And when I realized I'm doing 10 jobs, and reality, I wasn't excelling at any of them. And if I could take this job and give it to one person, they can be excellent at it and far better than me.
When did you learn that? Was it just because of you had to for business, or was it something that you picked up years ago? Or
No, I think it was more out of just, again, hitting that wall of I can't do anymore, but I want to. And that's always kind of been my mindset. I want to do more. But when you hit that wall that you can't, then you figure out, how can I?
Yeah.
So create the problem and then figure out the solution.
I forgot who's.
Some people like to figure out the solution before the problem comes.
Boy, you know, that's one thing that I've heard a lot is, I forgot who said this, but everybody has the same problems. Successful people just figure them out faster than others. Yeah. And I mean, that's a huge holdup for every single person. And that's a cool thing about business is it's not just the fact of making money. You really have to grow as yourself to be able to do more and more. So, I mean, how did you go about, once you first started delegating this and say you get this first store lined out, and now you go, and I always like to say it like this, like what I always look at my job is, I'm like, there's a thicket out there, I'm like a bush hog, I go and cut it down, and then I try and figure out somebody to come back and then clean it up. So like after you went out there and did this second store, how did you wrangle in managing two? What systems did you put in place to build it and manage with two stores?
Because when we opened the second store, I wasn't involved in the daily operations of that store at that time. Mm-hmm. In opening the second store, I basically duplicated our first store, thinking that it was going to be perfect. I quickly identified it was far from that, and then I put myself actually in that store for almost 3 years.
Yeah.
In that process, identifying what's wrong and going back and forth between my two stores and understanding I didn't have duplicatable systems and processes.
Now, when you're saying, so like you had to go through, and I think everybody's, you know, things are so, what do we say, logically easy, emotionally impossible.
Yeah.
Logically, it's just, I'll just build another one over here. And then, so you do this, and then you have to reverse engineer what you've done in this original location. When you're saying system and was it the training for staff? Was it the inventory? Was it display? What was the biggest thing that, because now you have 3 locations.
Yes.
How did you get that second location in good enough shape to then do the third?
So it was once we got the 2 stores running with systems and processes, again, eliminating basically my job once again.
Yeah.
But knowing I want to continue to grow, I'm not done yet. At that point I identify, okay, I think I'm getting bored again, which always scares my wife, because at that point she's like, oh no, that means another store.
Yeah.
But understanding if I'm managing stores, then I can't add stores.
Yeah.
So once again, identifying that I have to replace myself. So that's when was able to bring in basically our director of stores, and that was Nate that you met.
Yeah.
And he then stepped into my role, and then identifying basically my position today is to help and grow our employees while growing our company.
Right.
One of the biggest ways to do that, which I love that you've identified that need, is how do you continue the training for staff and keeping them accountable to that ongoing training. So I heard years ago that, oh, I just got somebody in and they've got 20 years of experience. But the problem is they got 1 year of experience
20
times. They're really not a 20-year veteran, seasoned person. So how do you make sure that you're always, and I love that I heard years ago, that train your staff so that they can leave. Treat them so they never will.
Right. That's a good, and that's what we were talking about today too. Is that, I mean, and it's almost synonymous in people who build jewelry stores and companies like that, because it's so experience driven. Like the day I met you in Vegas with Zach, we were like, oh, Joel's like really cool. Like, you know, and it's fun. And so, you know, I guess that energy, you attract people that go through there, and then, you know, if you treat them like that, then they treat your customers that way. So how have you, I mean, you've built up quite a large staff. How did you attract staff? How did you recruit? How did you kind of build what you have today?
That's a great question. I love the way my wife puts it. And she says, when somebody walks into a door of one of our stores, it's no different than welcoming them into our home. It should feel the same.
Right.
Knowing that the industry we are in is a feeling business. And you have to be able to connect with people. So with that, I love to say that every single person on our team has to have our heart and be able to be a reflection of us.
Right.
What is our mission? Our mission for our company is to show unconditional love through our people, our process, and our jewelry. The product actually is the last part of that.
Yeah.
So understand, we are a people-driven business. With that, I love to say we hire character and we train talent. A lot of people do it opposite.
Absolutely.
So understanding talent is actually not the key in our industry. Character is.
Character. 100. I mean, because that's the thing that, you know, people talk to us all the time and they say, well, I'm sure you got to trust somebody to deal with jewelry or deal with your inventory. I was like, no, I got to trust them to deal with the customers.
Right.
Because it took 50 years to get them, and then it takes 5 seconds to lose them.
Right.
And so, I mean, that's what we were talking about earlier today about clienteling and existing customers and going back and forth. And I mean, you hit the nail on the head. I mean, you've got to meet Bill and Sherry, because it's the same. My mom says the same thing.
Yeah.
Treat them as if they're in your home. Go back from there and go from that point forward. What's your favorite category of jewelry to sell?
Man, I have a fascination at this point with pocket knives.
Yeah.
And I never leave home without a pocket knife. So I love our William Henry line.
Yeah.
We've
got some in the case right there too.
So, and the fact that you have them, that's something we sell. So many guys will say, well, I don't wear jewelry. Yeah, well, we got jewelry for your pocket.
And you know, that's so funny that you would say that, because we went to Dallas Safari Club this year to go and look at this oak room, and we walked around there, and you would think that like none of these guys would be that. That's the customer you want.
It is.
Those are the guys that have the wives who buy the jewelry, the customers that come in for William Henry. It was a really cool experience. If you've never been, you need to go. It was very cool. But William Henry Knives is your favorite to show. What really built your business originally?
What built our business was actually custom.
Yeah.
So being a benchy, and actually learning it from the back door to the front door and actually knowing the manufacturing process, we built our business on service.
Right.
So one of the pieces I left out in the beginning was so that we could pay our bills. I actually went around to every eyeglass store in the Tulsa area, gave them a stack of cards and told them that I will fix any pair of eyeglasses for $20.
Yeah.
I averaged about 30 eyeglasses a week, which was $600 a week, and that paid all my bills.
That's solid.
So with that, I don't know if you've ever seen a pair of glasses that somebody hasn't cleaned for 30 years.
I probably have a couple that have fallen under my bed.
Oh,
They're
it's bad.
not that old, but they're...
So I'd like to say we don't fix eyeglasses anymore.
Yeah.
Out of need. So, but knowing the custom manufacturing side, that was my passion.
Yeah.
And I loved knowing that when the typical jewelry store out there is having their jewelry mass produced, possibly in China or wherever it is, and that's not a one of one, that's a one of 100,000.
Right.
There's nothing special about that piece. So how can I make my piece extra special? So that's where we started making one-of-a-kind custom jewelry. And today we average about 500 customs a year. And
That's a lot.
It is.
Now
And
that's still, I mean, because the cool thing, that's how you started, and that's still a very large part of your business.
It is.
And Nate was saying that y'all started off on bridal and different things like that, start with like a tour of the custom shop.
Yes. So in that, I would say that's my favorite thing to sell. And the reason why is because of the experience that it has
Right.
with the guest that comes in, and it gives them a hands-on feeling that they don't get anywhere else. So we actually take them through a tour of our manufacturing shop. They can see it, touch it, feel it. And we've set our shop up almost like a lab. So it's got that mystique of,
Yeah.
I've never seen this before.
That's so like out of all the people that I've talked to in jewelry, the people who have successful and cool stories. I mean, the coolest thing about it is that you took your passion, which was on the bench by accident,
Yeah.
and then took that custom and then built it into more and more. And so you're not really a jewelry store; you're like an experience store.
Yes.
And it's really cool to see that start your business and then be like the evolution. And like we were talking about now, or like at lunch, is that is really where we need to go. And it's funny because people talk to us about the training. We looked over all the secret shopping and stuff today. And if you really get down the nuts and bolts of it, and the easiest way to do it is to do business the way you did 40, 50 years ago, and then care about somebody.
Yeah, it is.
So what if you had to go back in time and tell yourself, right as you were going to that 400 to 600 or 6,000 square foot store, what are some of the things that you would tell yourself?
Probably keep mowing lawns.
Keep going.
It would be trust people to help you faster. Don't try and do it all yourself.
Yeah.
And I love you can go fast as one, but you can go far as many.
Yeah.
I'd rather do it with a group of people than by myself.
100%.
So if I could go back and tell that person to build that team quicker,
Yeah.
that would be the best advice that I could give myself 25 years ago.
Well, man, I think that's a pretty great story. I absolutely love the story, and man, I'm glad you came down here, and thank you for being our second guest on Across the Case. And so thank you for tuning in, and we'll have another segment coming out next month. You turn back in. This is Joel Weiland from J. David Jewelry in Oklahoma.